The glass walls of the conference room shimmered with late afternoon sunlight, reflecting rows of faces that Ellen Miles had known for nearly 2 decades. She stood by the end of the table, one hand resting lightly on her planner, her pen perfectly aligned with the edge of her notes. The quarterly meeting had gone smoothly, revenue up, margins healthy, all metrics stable. She was proud, quietly, in that professional way that never showed. Then the CEO cleared his throat. "Before we wrap up," said Daniel Mercer, 35, sharp suit, sharper grin. "The board and I have been reviewing the company's direction. We believe it's time for a shift, new leadership, new energy, a new voice guiding our financial future." Silence pressed through the room. Ellen felt it first in her chest, that cold, slow pressure that replaces heartbeat with calculation. Daniel continued, smiling to no one in particular. "Ellen, you've been incredible. But after 17 years, we think the time has come to transition. We'll be opening your role to new candidates. Of course, we'll honor your contract, and HR will assist with retirement packages." There it was, retirement packages. The word landed like glass breaking quietly in another room. Ellen didn't move. Her pen still rested exactly where it was. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the faint clink of Daniel's wedding ring against his coffee cup. She looked around the table, men in navy suits, younger, hungry, avoiding her eyes. Even Monica from HR looked down, pretending to scroll her tablet. No one spoke. It wasn't cruelty, it was cowardice, and Ellen had seen both before. Her voice was calm, almost soft. "May I ask," she said, "if there were concerns with my performance?" Daniel gave that polite corporate laugh. "Of course not, Ellen. You're solid. Just, we need fresh perspective. New blood, you know. Markets move fast, and we want someone who understands younger investor trends." The phrase hung in the air like an insult disguised as praise. New blood. Your old blood. She nodded once, slowly, then gathered her papers. "Well," she said, "thank you for your clarity." Daniel looked momentarily unsure how to respond. "We'll schedule a transition meeting next week. You don't have to rush to clear your office." "I'll be finished today," she replied, and walked out before anyone could say her name. The hallway was silent. Behind the glass, she could see the skyline, Boston in winter light, pale and gold. She had built this place piece by piece, through balance sheets, crisis recoveries, and mergers that should have failed but didn't. And now, she was too old to lead. She entered her office. Every object was precise, intentional. A framed article from 2008, "The Woman Who Saved Meridian Capital." She took it down, looked at her own face in the reflection, younger, determined, and smiled, faintly. Her phone buzzed. A message from a junior analyst she'd mentored for years. "I'm so sorry, Ellen. None of us knew they'd do this today." She typed back. "Don't worry. Keep your head down. Learn from the numbers, not the noise." She set the phone aside. Then she opened her laptop to finish a report: habit, professionalism, dignity. When the screen blinked to life, she noticed an internal message still open. The subject line. "Finally got rid of the dinosaur clinking glasses. It wasn't meant for her. Someone had sent it to the wrong thread." She stared at it for a long moment. The cursor blinked. Her face stayed calm, but something inside her, something old, patient, analytical, began to wake up. She closed the laptop, folded her planner, and took a slow breath. No anger. No tears. Just the faint tremor of realization that she had spent her life building a fortress that others now wanted to repaint in their colors. But they had forgotten something. Every wall in this company, every system, every formula of profit they now bragged about, was hers. She opened her desk drawer. Inside, neatly stacked, were binders marked 2008 to 2010, Algorithm Development, Property of E. Miles. Her handwriting, clear, assertive, untouched for 15 years. She traced a finger along the label, the faintest smile forming. For the first time all afternoon, she felt something close to warmth. That evening, the office was empty. Ellen walked through the corridor one last time, heels echoing softly. The security guard nodded as she passed. Outside, the wind cut cold against her face, but the city lights shimmered like constellations she could still navigate. At the corner cafe, she paused, pulled out her phone, and scrolled through her old contacts until she found one name, Pierce and Nolan Law Group. She hadn't spoken to them in years. Her thumb hovered, then tapped call. The phone rang once, twice. A familiar voice answered, "Ellen. It's been forever." She smiled, eyes calm, voice steady. "James, I might need to revisit an old contract. The one we drafted in 2008. A pause. Then his tone shifted, from casual to alert. "That the one with the proprietary rights clause?" "Yes," Ellen said, looking up at the skyline. "The one they forgot to read." The next morning, Ellen woke to the faint hum of city traffic outside her apartment. Her coffee brewed, dark and bitter. She didn't turn on the news. She didn't need to. The company she'd built was moving on without her, and the world, as it always did, kept spinning. On the kitchen counter lay a stack of old files she'd pulled from her storage closet the night before. Faded binders, yellowed pages, the smell of ink and dust. She'd almost forgotten how it felt to see her handwriting on printed contracts, the loops, the neat precision of her signature. She flipped through the first binder. Meridian Capital, Intellectual Property Agreement, 2008. Her name appeared 6 times across the document, each one clean, unwavering. And there, near the bottom of page 12, was the line she remembered but no one else ever did. "Any financial tool, model, or predictive algorithm originated by the undersigned during tenure remains the intellectual property of the author unless separately licensed or transferred in writing." Her breath stilled. The page rustled softly as she traced her finger along the clause, the invisible sentence that had once been dismissed as legal fluff. But in that moment, it glowed like a fuse waiting to be lit. They were still using her predictive algorithm. She knew it. Every quarter, she'd seen the patterns, the identical formula structures. Her algorithm had become the foundation of Meridian's success, and according to this document, it still belonged to her. She closed the binder slowly, leaned back in her chair, and let out a small laugh, not bitter, not triumphant, just quiet disbelief at how easily power hid in plain sight. At noon, she met James Pierce at a cafe near Beacon Hill. He was older too now, a silver-haired attorney with a sharp memory and a habit of stirring his coffee twice before speaking. 15 years, he said, glancing over the document she slid across the table. "I remember drafting this. You insisted on that clause. The board didn't want it, but you held your ground." "They thought it was harmless," Ellen replied. "They thought wrong." He smiled, tapping the page. "Do you realize what this means? If they're still using your algorithm without a licensing agreement." "They are," she said quietly. "Every version, every update. My fingerprints are all over their system." James leaned back, exhaling. "Then you own the heartbeat of their company." Ellen sipped her coffee, gaze steady. "I don't want to own it, James. I want them to understand what it cost to erase me." That evening, Ellen returned to her apartment and sat by the window overlooking the river. She watched the city lights flicker, gold, white, and blue, like numbers blinking across an endless spreadsheet. Her mind ticked through possibilities: licensing lawsuits, cease and desist orders, valuation leverage. Every scenario played out like a chess match she had already won. Still, she hesitated. A lifetime of professionalism made revenge feel foreign. But this wasn't revenge. It was correction. The next day, she visited an old friend in the accounting department, David, a quiet man who had stayed loyal even after she left. They met in a park, early morning, where joggers passed and no one cared who they were. David handed her a USB drive. "They didn't wipe your access yet," he whispered. "This contains the current financial predictive model. Look familiar?" Ellen plugged it into her laptop later that afternoon. Lines of code scrolled across the screen, her syntax, her formulas, her logic, untouched. They hadn't even changed the variable names. At the bottom of the file was a tag she'd embedded 15 years ago, back when she wrote the program late at night in the office's dim glow. Copyright E. Miles, proprietary sequence. She stared at it. A hidden signature no one had ever noticed. Her phone buzzed again. James's voice came through, low and certain. "I spoke with a contact at Whitmore Holdings," he said. "They're looking to expand their financial analytics division. They'd be very interested in meeting the original creator of Meridian system." Ellen looked out the window. The city skyline blurred in the afternoon haze. "So, you're suggesting I join the competition?" "I'm suggesting," James said, "that you license your property to them. If you do that, Meridian will have to either pay you, or stop using your algorithm entirely. Either way, you win." She was silent for a long moment. "Then, draft the papers." That night, she went to her old office building. Security recognized her, still greeted her politely, unaware of the undercurrent shifting beneath the surface. From the lobby, she could see the company logo gleaming behind glass, Meridian Capital, precision in motion. She stood there for a minute, watching the letters shimmer like a lie. Then she walked out, heels echoing against marble. In the reflection of the glass doors, her own image stared back, silver hair, calm eyes, a woman who had been called outdated, irrelevant, past her prime. And yet, every number, every dollar, every algorithm that fed that empire, carried her signature. She whispered to herself, half smiling. "They fired me for being old. They forgot I built the future they're standing on." The next morning, a new headline appeared on the financial news site. Whitmore Holdings announces strategic licensing partnership with Ellen Miles, developer of the Meridian predictive model. Ellen read it on her phone over breakfast. Her coffee tasted warmer that day. Somewhere across the city, Daniel Mercer was probably seeing the same headline, realizing, too late, that the woman he called obsolete had just turned his empire into a liability. And as she watched the sunlight spill across her table, Ellen said softly, almost to herself, "Power doesn't vanish. It just waits to be recognized." The ballroom glittered with crystal light and polite laughter. Every year, Meridian Capital hosted its Innovation Gala, a performance of wealth dressed as humility, where the same people congratulated themselves for surviving another fiscal quarter. Ellen had attended 17 of them. This one, however, was different. She wasn't invited. She came anyway. Not as an employee, as a guest of Whitmore Holdings. The rival company had offered her a seat at their table. It was strategic, of course. Her name in the room was worth more than any sponsorship banner. When she entered, conversation faltered for a moment, the kind of silence that hums between champagne glasses. Ellen's silver hair caught the ballroom light, her navy silk dress shimmered faintly like polished steel. She smiled, not to anyone, just to herself, and found her seat near the edge of the stage. Daniel Mercer was already there, surrounded by board members and new hires. He noticed her immediately. For a heartbeat, his confident grin faltered. Then he composed himself and raised his glass in mocking acknowledgement. "Didn't expect to see you here, Ellen," he said as she passed. couldn't stay away from the spotlight. She paused, her eyes level. "I thought I'd see what new blood looks like under chandelier light," she replied. His smile froze, a fraction of a second, then he turned back to his entourage. Laughter erupted, just a little too loud. As the night wore on, the speeches began. Investors clinked glasses, praising innovation and forward thinking. Daniel took the stage near the end, microphone in hand, charisma rehearsed. "This year," he began, "Meridian has proven that adaptability is the key to survival. We've modernized leadership, integrated youthful talent, and embraced technologies that represent the future, not the past." The crowd applauded. Ellen sat still. Her gaze never wavered. "And of course," Daniel continued, "we wouldn't be here without the legacy of those who came before us. But in business, sentiment can't replace progress." A chuckle rippled through the audience. Someone whispered, "That's about her." Someone else laughed. Daniel smiled. He looked straight at Ellen. "So let's raise a glass," he said, voice smooth, "to those who knew when to step aside." The room erupted in applause and polite laughter. It was a beautiful cruelty, polished, indirect, public. Ellen's expression didn't change. She raised her glass too, a motion of precision, not emotion. The camera flash from a journalist nearby caught her at that exact moment, her face calm, eyes unreadable, and the image would circulate by morning under the caption: "Meridian CEO celebrates new era as former CFO attends gala." She stayed until dessert, listening to hollow speeches and self-congratulation. Every word he spoke was an insult wrapped in corporate language. But every insult only sharpened her resolve. Outside, snow had begun to fall, thin, glittering flakes drifting through the city air. Ellen stood beneath the portico, waiting for her car. The driver was late. Behind her, the doors opened. Daniel stepped out, scarf around his neck, a glass still in his hand. "You didn't have to come, you know," he said. "I suppose you wanted closure." She turned to face him. "No," she said. "I wanted perspective. And you gave it to me." He smirked. "Still thinking like an executive, Ellen? You should enjoy retirement. Or maybe write a book, How to Stay Relevant After 60. Her voice stayed calm. "I might write one," she said. "I'd call it, How to Read What You Sign." He frowned, uncertain, but she was already stepping into her car. The door closed with the soft finality of punctuation. The city lights blurred past the window as the car moved through the snow. Ellen sat back, replaying the evening in her mind, every word, every smirk, every laugh. And yet, beneath the surface humiliation, there was something else, a pulse of quiet exhilaration. Daniel had just confirmed what she needed to know. They were still using her algorithm, still proud of the system she built. She could hear it in his speech, every statistic, every chart, every phrase he used about predictive optimization. Those were her words. She opened her purse, pulled out her phone, and typed a message to James Pierce. "He mocked me publicly. That's fine. They're still using the model. Proceed with the licensing notice." James responded within a minute. "Understood. Whitmore's legal department will file before morning." She set the phone down, exhaled slowly, and looked out the window again. The snowfall thickened, muting the city into silence. When she arrived home, she hung her coat, placed her glass clutch on the table, and turned on a single lamp. The apartment glowed warm against the cold outside. She removed her earrings, one by one, setting them beside the contract folder from 2008, now lying open, a page marked by her pen. She picked it up, looked at her signature, neat, confident, untouched by time, and whispered. "Mockery is noise. Evidence is power." Then she smiled, faintly. The kind of smile that doesn't seek applause, only inevitability. Somewhere downtown, the legal department of Whitmore Holdings was drafting an official letter. Cease and desist, unauthorized use of proprietary predictive financial model, property of Ellen Miles. By the time Daniel Mercer reached his office the next morning, the email would already be in his inbox. And for the first time, the man who mocked her would feel something she'd mastered long ago: silence. The morning after the gala, the city of Boston woke beneath a soft curtain of snow. Inside her apartment, Ellen poured coffee into a porcelain cup, her movements calm, deliberate, the ritual of a woman who had already made peace with chaos. But beneath that stillness was momentum. She checked her phone, 12 missed calls, 4 unread emails, and one headline that made her smile. Meridian faces legal inquiry over proprietary algorithm claim. It had begun. She sat at her desk, sunlight cutting through the blinds, illuminating the 2008 contract. On the screen, the notice James had sent to Meridian's legal team was copied to her, formal, precise, devastating. It read like a blade in legal language. All usage of the predictive model known internally as MFS sequence falls under exclusive intellectual property belonging to Ms. Ellen Miles. Continued deployment without licensing constitutes infringement under Section 18B of federal copyright law. She reread the sentence twice. There was no anger now. Only clarity. Her phone buzzed again, this time, an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Ms. Miles. This is Stephen Hayes from Whitmore Holdings, Boston headquarters. I hope I'm not calling too early. His tone was respectful, deliberate, the kind that hinted at money and motive. We've followed the recent filings, Hayes continued. Your model has quite the reputation. We'd like to discuss a possible partnership, exclusive licensing, if you're open to it. Ellen leaned back, gaze fixed on the city outside her window. Whitmore, she said softly. The same Whitmore that tried to acquire Meridian last spring. Yes, Hayes replied, almost proudly. The very one. She let the silence hang. He rushed to fill it. Frankly, Ms. Miles, Meridian's predictive model is their crown jewel, but if it's legally yours, that changes everything. You'd be the only person capable of crippling or empowering two of the largest financial analytics firms in the country. That's not a threat, that's leverage. We're offering to formalize it. Ellen smiled faintly. Then let's talk. 2 days later, she stepped into Whitmore's Boston headquarters, a skyscraper of glass and ambition overlooking the frozen Charles River. Inside, everything gleamed white and chrome, a temple of precision. Executives greeted her with practiced warmth, but she could feel the undercurrent: curiosity, awe, maybe even fear. In the boardroom, Stephen Hayes extended his hand. It's an honor, Ms. Miles. You've caused quite the stir. I didn't cause it, Ellen said. They did. I just wrote better contracts. He laughed awkwardly, then gestured toward the wall-sized display showing Meridian's plummeting stock ticker. You've seen this. Ellen's gaze lingered on the red downward slope. 27% overnight, she murmured. Familiar pattern. That's what happens when you remove stability from a system built on borrowed equations. Exactly, Hayes said. We'd like to propose something. A partnership. You license your algorithm to Whitmore. We'll rebrand it as the Whitmore Predictive Framework, and in return, you'll receive both compensation and advisory status. Quietly, of course. Quietly, she repeated, almost to herself. That word mattered. Ellen didn't want fame, she wanted control. Control was quieter. Deeper. More permanent. When she returned home that evening, the city was blanketed in snow. She poured herself a glass of wine and stood by the window, watching flakes drift through the lamplight. Her mind wandered back to the first time she'd written the code, 15 years ago, sitting alone in the Meridian data lab after midnight. She remembered the exhaustion, the cold coffee, the way her hands shook as she debugged line after line. No one had helped her. No one had believed in the idea. And now, that same piece of logic was being fought over by men in tailored suits who had called her obsolete. She raised the glass to her reflection. To obsolescence, she said softly. The most underestimated asset on the market. At 8 p.m., her phone rang again, James Pierce. They responded, he said. Meridian's legal counsel just filed a preliminary objection. They're claiming your model was developed under employment jurisdiction. Expected, she said. But they'll lose. They're scared, Ellen. Their investors are calling. The board's in chaos. Mercer's apparently cancelled his trip to San Francisco. She smiled faintly. Then we have their attention. James hesitated. You're sure you want to go through with Whitmore? Once this becomes public, it's not just business. It's war. Ellen walked to her desk and opened the old contract again. Her signature gleamed under the lamplight. I'm not declaring war, she said. I'm reclaiming authorship. The next morning, the Boston Herald released a new article. Whitmore Holdings in talks to license predictive algorithm from former Meridian CFO Alan Miles. Legal experts predict unprecedented shift in financial software ownership. Within hours, Ellen's inbox flooded. Journalists. Analysts. Old colleagues suddenly remembering her number. Even a message from a young woman at Meridian. Ms. Miles, I just wanted to say, watching you stand up to them gives me hope. They treat women here like furniture. Thank you. Ellen read it twice, then closed her laptop. The truth was simple, she wasn't doing this just for herself anymore. She was doing it for every voice that had been talked over in a boardroom. Every woman told to step aside. Every mind dismissed because it came with wrinkles and patience instead of noise. That evening, as the sun set over Boston Harbor, Ellen stood on the balcony of Whitmore's headquarters beside Stephen Hayes. The skyline glowed gold and blue, wind cutting cold across the water. Do you ever regret leaving Meridian? Hayes asked quietly. Ellen shook her head. I didn't leave, she said. They let go of the wrong hand. He smiled, unsure how to respond. Ellen looked out at the city one last time. Send the licensing draft, she said. And make sure Meridian receives a courtesy copy. Hayes nodded. First thing tomorrow. As she walked away, the camera might have lingered, her silhouette framed by glass and light, the beginning of a legend no one saw coming. The first email arrived at dawn. From Pierce and Nolan Legal Associates. Subject, confidential, internal review authorization. Ellen opened it before the sun had fully risen. Whitmore's board had approved the next phase, a quiet internal audit of Meridian's financial operations, disguised as due diligence for potential acquisition. In truth, it was a scalpel, and Ellen would be holding the blade. She sipped her coffee, scanning the proposal. Every line, every column, every cross-reference had her fingerprints. She'd helped build these systems. She knew where numbers liked to hide. We'll need access to their subledger files, James Pierce said later that morning during their call. If there's any inconsistency, even a small one, we'll find it. Ellen's tone was calm. There will be. Daniel always wanted results faster than reality could provide. 3 days later, she walked into Whitmore's forensic accounting office, a silent floor filled with glowing monitors and specialists who spoke in numbers more fluently than words. Stephen Hayes greeted her with an uneasy smile. You sure you want to be hands-on? Most advisors just read the report. Ellen adjusted her glasses. I wrote the architecture they're investigating. If you want precision, I'm not staying on the sidelines. He didn't argue. She sat down beside the lead auditor, a young woman named Clara Nguyen, brilliant, steady, and curious. Clara's screen displayed cascading lines of transaction data, all linked to Meridian's predictive fund. Ellen leaned closer. Run a comparative variance across Q2 to Q4 margins. Isolate any overstatement beyond 1.8%. Clara's fingers danced over the keyboard. Within seconds, the numbers shifted, revealing red highlighted anomalies. There, Ellen said quietly. Round that up. $17 million in unreported bonus deferrals. Hidden under operational expenses. Clara frowned. That's deliberate manipulation. Of course it is, Ellen replied. Daniel never believed in losing. He just redefined what winning looked like. That afternoon, Ellen met James in Whitmore's glass conference room overlooking the harbor. Outside, the snow had melted into gray mist, the city looked like brushed steel. James laid out the findings, pages of irregularities, buried transactions, and duplicated invoice codes. Classic financial misdirection, he said. They inflated quarterly performance to boost investor confidence. SEC won't like this. Ellen flipped through the report. Her voice stayed low, but her eyes were bright. They thought no one would ever check, because they owned the narrative. Until now, James said. She looked up, a faint smile. No. Until I decided to read the numbers they forgot to question. That evening, Whitmore's legal team prepared the audit summary. It was clinical, sterile, almost beautiful in its precision. 17 million unreported. False earnings projection. Manipulated asset pool. Risk exposure concealed under algorithmic variance. At the bottom, Ellen's name appeared again, consulting advisor, Eve Miles. She stared at it for a long moment. That signature, once erased from Meridian's legacy, now sat at the heart of the document that could bring the company to its knees. She sent it to James with a single message. File under code 47, whistle review. Within the hour, a quiet alert reached the Financial Compliance Bureau. The first domino had tipped. The next day, Daniel Mercer stood in his office surrounded by anxious executives. Screens around him flashed red, Meridian stock, down 9%. A memo had leaked, not the full audit, but just enough to spark panic. Who leaked this? He snapped. Find out who's behind it. Monica from HR hesitated. Sir, there's speculation. Whitmore Holdings. They're claiming rights to the predictive model. It's tied to the same woman. Don't say her name, Daniel cut in, voice sharp. She's irrelevant. But his reflection in the glass looked less certain. The calm veneer was cracking. Meanwhile, Ellen watched from her apartment, the television muted. The financial ticker scrolled beneath breaking headlines. Meridian faces internal review amid allegations of accounting discrepancies. CEO Daniel Mercer silent as board demands explanation. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Clara. They're panicking. Internal files show edits and deletions in the predictive system logs. Ellen typed back. Preserve everything. Mirror the database. Use external timestamp verification. A pause. Then Clara replied. Already done. They'll never know until it's too late. Ellen smiled. The apprentice had learned well. That night, she met James at the Harbor Cafe, the same one where this all began. The air was colder now, sharper, but her expression was serene. He slid a folder across the table. You've built a perfect case. Fraud, misuse of intellectual property, market deception. If we release this, the board will have no choice but to remove Mercer. Ellen looked at the folder but didn't touch it. Not yet. James frowned. Why wait? Because timing, she said, is the final weapon of the patient. She looked toward the water, the city lights trembling on the waves. Let him believe he still has control. The fall hits harder when the ground feels close. Later that night, Ellen sat alone in her apartment. Her desk lamp cast soft shadows across the contract, the same old paper she'd carried since 2008. Beside it lay the audit summary, and beside that, her pen. She wrote one sentence at the bottom of a page. Truth is not a weapon. It's a mirror. Eventually, everyone looks. Then she placed the pen down, turned off the light, and let the city fade into darkness. Tomorrow, the headlines would spread. Tomorrow, Daniel Mercer would call an emergency board meeting. And tomorrow, for the first time, the company that had dismissed her as too old to lead would be forced to follow her numbers again, this time, straight into exposure. The morning broke cold and silver. Boston's skyline shimmered under a thin fog, the harbor quiet, like the breath before a storm. Inside her apartment, Ellen stood before the window, coffee in hand, reading the headline glowing on her tablet. Meridian Capital under investigation. Former CFO files suit over intellectual property and financial misrepresentation. She traced the headline with her fingertip, calm, precise, as if she were underlining a sentence she had written years ago. In a way, she had. 2 nights earlier, in a small law office on Tremont Street, she had sat opposite James Pierce. The room smelled of coffee, paper, and impending consequence. Between them lay a single document, 67 pages long, printed on cream stock, bound with a black clip. The lawsuit. James adjusted his glasses. Once we file this, there's no going back. Meridian will retaliate, press statements, character attacks, maybe even dig through your personal life. Are you ready for that? Ellen folded her hands. They've already taken what they could. This isn't about revenge, James. It's about record-keeping. He gave a small, grim smile. Then let's write history. He slid the document across the desk. She signed it with the same pen she'd used 15 years ago, the silver Parker that had survived every contract, every betrayal. The sound of the nib scratching across paper was soft, but it carried the weight of an empire shifting. The lawsuit landed the next morning like a thunderclap. Media outlets raced to cover it. Investors panicked. Ellen Miles, former CFO of Meridian Capital, accuses the company of unlawful use of her proprietary algorithm and falsified reporting practices. Meridian denies wrongdoing. CEO Daniel Mercer calls the claim an act of bitterness. On television, Daniel's face appeared under studio lights, still polished, still composed. We respect Ms. Miles's contributions, he said, voice syrup smooth, but this is a misunderstanding. Meridian has always operated with integrity. Ellen watched the interview from her living room, the sound muted. She could read the micro-expressions, the stiff jaw, the darting eyes, the too fast blink. He was afraid. At Whitmore's headquarters, the legal war room buzzed. Charts, emails, and archived contracts covered the walls. Ellen moved between them like a general in quiet command. Stephen Hayes entered, holding a printed statement. We're ready to release Whitmore's position. It'll confirm the licensing agreement with you, make it official. Do it, Ellen said. Let them see I'm not fighting alone. He hesitated. You understand what this does, right? This isn't just a lawsuit anymore. It's a corporate battle. You've just declared yourself a major player in the industry again. Ellen looked out the window at the frozen river. Then they'll remember I was never gone. That afternoon, the first hearing was scheduled. Federal Court, Room 402. Ellen walked in wearing a navy suit, minimal jewelry, and a calmness that filled the space like gravity. Reporters turned. Cameras flashed. She didn't look at them. At the opposing table, Daniels sat flanked by two attorneys from Price and Latham, young, aggressive, expensive. When their eyes met, he smiled, that same patronizing smile he'd given her at the gala. "Ms. Miles," he said quietly, "I didn't think you'd go this far." She leaned slightly closer, voice even. "That's because you never thought I'd have to." The clerk called the court to order. The hum of conversation died. James began his opening statement, crisp, surgical. "Your Honor, this case is not about emotion. It's about ownership. Meridian Capital has built its success on an algorithm that legally and contractually belongs to Ms. Miles. Furthermore, internal audits have revealed manipulation of financial data to mislead investors. We will show you the documents, the metadata, the unchanged code structure, proof that what's theirs began with her, and that what's hidden will not remain hidden." Ellen sat still, hands folded, expression unreadable. Daniel's lawyers objected, of course, posturing, deflecting, but every word they said only deepened the silence that followed. When James presented the first exhibit, a printed copy of the 2008 contract, the courtroom shifted. Daniel's attorney rose. "That's outdated language, non-binding in current context." James turned to Ellen. "Ms. Miles, could you read Section 4, Paragraph 2? She did. Slowly. Clearly. Her voice steady, resonant. "Any financial tool, model, or predictive algorithm originated by the undersigned during tenure remains the intellectual property of the author unless separately licensed or transferred in writing." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Was this clause ever amended?" "No, Your Honor," she said. It was ignored. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Even Daniel's lawyers exchanged glances. Ellen returned the page to James, then looked straight ahead. The moment was quiet, but it crackled with tension, the kind of silence that only truth can make unbearable. That night, she walked home through Beacon Hill, the winter wind curling around her coat. The city lights reflected in wet pavement, streaks of gold and blue. Her steps were slow, deliberate, the pace of someone who knew that the hardest part wasn't winning the case, but maintaining the dignity to walk through it unshaken. When she reached her apartment, her phone buzzed again. A message from Clara. "They're deleting internal emails at Meridian. We can see the timestamps. I've mirrored everything." Ellen typed back. "Good. Let them dig their own grave. Just make sure it's deep enough for the truth to echo." She set the phone down and looked once more at the city, the towers, the glass, the same skyline she had watched when they fired her. Now it looked different. It looked smaller. The next morning, headlines spread across every business network. Ellen Miles versus Meridian Capital, the lawsuit that could redefine corporate ownership. CEO Daniel Mercer accused of financial misrepresentation, investors demand emergency board session. In the war of silence and signatures, Ellen had just fired the loudest shot. And for the first time, the empire that had erased her name now trembled under it.